come to the backbench debate on improving public transport. Sarah Dyke to move.
I beg to move that this House has considered improving public transport. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I would like to begin by thanking the Backbench Business Committee for scheduling this important and rather timely debate. The Government have recognised the need for a modal shift away from cars to public transport, but we are still a long way from achieving this commendable aspiration. The Government is aiming to change the way the railways and bus services operate in the UK, and so we stand at a crossroads, making it increasingly important that we head in the right direction. As members will know, transport is a key contributor to climate change and the release of greenhouse gases. The transport sector is responsible for more than a quarter of total UK emissions and is the most polluting single domestic sector. But all public transport combined, buses, coaches, trams, trains, shared mobility, accounts for only 9% of these emissions, with that number is falling every single year. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, improved public transport plays a huge role in delivering growth to local and regional communities. And all too often, public transport is a barrier to economic inclusion in rural areas. But we know better local integrated transport systems deliver growth and opportunity, 2 of the Government's 5 missions. Now, data from the Local Government Association found that 1% improvement in public transport journey times could support a nearly 1% reduction in employment deprivation. And the Government's own return on investment tool shows that helping someone back into work provides a £3,500 boost to their income, while national government benefits by £11,400 and wider society by £23,000.
On that point, would you give way?
Yes, of course I will.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way because she's making an excellent speech. I wonder if you'd agree with me that the single biggest reason that people fail to access work in rural areas is public transport. And then the figures that she's explained aren't just numbers, they are a way to benefit somebody's whole way of life if they can access work because they can catch the bus there.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And yes, I entirely agree with my honourable friend, and I will come on to that further in my speech. Because poor public transport, however, compounds social ills. While the unreliability, the inaccessibility and the lack of integration in rural Britain prevents people from trusting it, can get them to where they need to go, when they need to go, and crucially, they can get home again. Somerset has the worst bus services in the country, forcing communities into isolation or locked into expensive and polluting car usage. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, my constituents from areas that are currently served by the railways are concerned about how the impact of building the Old Oak Common will disrupt travel to London. Many residents who travel from Castle Carey through to London will face up to a decade of disruption as a result of these works. So I would welcome the Minister's comments on how this will be mitigated. I would also like to mention the future of South Western Railways after the decision to renationalise the company in May 2025 was made recently. This will be the largest train operating company to ever be nationalised in the UK and will come before Great British Railway. The body overseeing the public operator will be operational. In a matter of just a few months, the Department will, in effect, take responsibility for hundreds of millions of journeys, extra journeys. And I know my constituents travelling on the Exeter St David's to Waterloo line from Temple Goom or nearby stations are anxious about the future of the trains that they rely on. So I would welcome the Minister's comments on this. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I have spoken many times in this place about the reintroduction of a station in the Somerton and Langport area. And I would like to thank the Langport Transport Group for their hard work and tenacity in trying to bring forward a railway station to the area after the area lost its stations during the beaching cuts of the 1960s. The Somerton and Langport area is the longest stretch of rail between London and Cornwall that isn't served by a railway station at all. Langport Transport Group prepared a proposal to the Restoring Your Railway Fund and won £50,000 to develop a strategic outline case alongside Somerset Council, which they submitted in February 2022. Now, despite this huge effort, they have never heard back, even after I pressed both the former Prime Minister and the Transport Secretary in the last Parliament for an answer. Now that scheme has been cancelled by the Chancellor, local residents feel that they're in limbo. Madam Deputy Speaker, having a railway station in the Somerton and Langport area makes so much sense. It would serve the 50,000 people that live nearby who currently aren't served by the railway line that runs right through their community. Nearby stations like Castle Carey, Taunton, Bridgewater and Yeovil Junction are all at least 12 to 15 miles away, while there is no direct bus to Castle Carey or Taunton, where it's then a hike to the nearest bus station, hardly an incentive, and illustrating the lack of an integrated public transport in Somerset, a topic I will speak on later. A railway station in the area would do more than connect residents to the rail line. It could also boost the local economy, bringing in more visitors. We have seen nearby passenger numbers at Castle Carey, the official railway station for the Glastonbury Festival, jump massively over recent years, from 152,000 in 2002-2003 to 251,000 in 2017-2018. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I may have a slight bias, but there are so many reasons for people to stop and visit the area if there was a train station there. For example, the area is home to the River Parrot Trail, a scenic 50-mile walk that's home to some of lowland England's most beautiful and unchanged landscapes. So, as I mentioned, the proposal has recently been cast into doubt after the government announced the cancellation of the Restoring Your Railway Fund in the summer. We are still waiting for updates on what will happen to this project. Yes, of course.
I'd like to thank my honourable friend for giving way and for raising such an important topic to us all, but to my constituents in Bicester and Woodstock. After the Conservative-led administration cut all direct bus funding in our area in 2016, I'm very proud Liberal Democrats have reinstated community bus services. Would my honourable friend agree that it's incredibly important that in the government's new plans for public transport, they do not focus only on metropolitan areas, but provide adequate funding that these dislocated areas can access community bus transport using new technology for demand-led and cost-effective services for our residents?
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention, and absolutely, it's absolutely vital for rural areas. I have some excellent community transport providers in Glastonbury and Somerton, Wincanton Community Transport, and across Somerset we have the Slinky Bus, which provides those on-demand services, and crucial for people to be able to get access to surgery appointments, their jobs even, and getting them out and about and breaking down that rural isolation. So, just going back, I would welcome the Minister's comments regarding the Somerton and Langport Railway. Moving on to integrated transport, as I've mentioned, if we must wait longer for a station in the Langport and Somerton area, then it's crucial that in the meantime the area receives an integrated public transport system to nearby railway stations in the form of rail bus links. Now, the former Transport Secretary, the day before her departure, set out a vision for more integrated public transport systems. And I do hope that the new Secretary of State keeps these aims alive, as it's something that is desperately needed in Somerset. Fragmented transport links leaves a traveller trying to get from Wincanton to Castle Carey, having to take a bus journey and then walk half a mile to the station to catch a train, with no integration between the bus timetable and the train times. Madam Deputy Speaker, in Devon, nearby, local buses, the Council and Great Western Railway have worked together to launch rail bus links that have improved timetables that correspond with mainline train services, alongside improved brand visibility of the service.
Will Honourable Friend give way on that point?
Yes, of course I will.
I thank her for giving way and for bringing this important debate. On the point of Great Western Railway working with local councils, in my constituency, GWR has been working with the Borough and the County Council on a new cycle link. Network Rail, unfortunately, are singularly blocking this development, which means that a strategic cycle link is not going to be probably completed unless Network Rail gets out of the way. It's Network Rail land. Would she agree with me that these different arms of government need to be working together much more strongly, and that cultural change in Network Rail is required if we're going to solve these problems with public transport and with active travel too?
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention. I wholeheartedly agree with him. The integration between public transport and active travel is absolutely vital. And he and I live in a beautiful part of the world, which frankly more people should get out and enjoy on two wheels or on 2 feet. But going back to my speech, this serves as an example of how the integrated rail bus links can work in rural areas and service communities that don't have a train station. There are huge opportunities to improve bus services around the country, and especially in Somerset. They're almost endless. Mind you, the starting point is quite low. Madam Deputy Speaker, Somerset County Council's Bus Service Improvement Plan bid back in 2022 acknowledged that Somerset had the worst rated bus service in the country at the time, and that was after 13 years of lack of investment under a Conservative-led administration. Bus provision is poor and unreliable. For example, the 54 bus route that runs through Glastonbury and Somerton, connecting Taunton and to Yeovil, lacks an evening or Saturday service. This leaves people who might work unpredictable or unsociable hours unable to trust the bus service and leave them reliant on a private car. Sherry in Glastonbury told me she has to wait for an hour for her bus home from work, meaning that despite finishing at 5 p.m, she doesn't get home until nearly 7:30. But if she were to drive, it would take her 10 minutes. Madam Deputy Speaker, the unreliability of buses combined with the poor state of bus stops and public information provides a major hurdle for bus users. And I would like to thank Somerset Bus Partnership for their unrelenting work to improve this. They have held over 100 bus stalls to inform local people about their nearest services, filling an information gap that has sadly been left by the service providers. Most bus stops don't have a printed sign timetable. They don't have real-time information, and often poor mobile connectivity in rural areas makes it difficult for people to access information online. Confirmed recently by Ian, who contacted me to tell me that the printed bus timetable in Glastonbury is barely legible. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is so disappointing because even small interventions could create vastly important changes that would support bus services. Now, a survey from Campaign for Better Transport has found that 52% of people would use more buses if they had better information at bus stops. But the onus to provide this information is sadly lacking when it comes to buses. Unlike rail, there are national standards that mandate a certain level of information is provided at stations. There is no equivalent for bus stops. Every rail station in Britain has a provision for real-time information, Madam Deputy Speaker, but we are 1 million miles away on achieving similar provision for our bus network. Bus users need certainty, and the availability of up-to-date, coordinated information on the bus network is lacking at the best of times and non-existent at the worst of times. It must change. One of the major barriers preventing simple things like clear information is the fractured nature of bus funding. The previous government's competitive strategy turned funding into a postcode lottery. Only 40% of eligible local authorities received any of the £1.2 billion of BSIP funding announced in 2021. And the Liberal Democrats have been calling for a simplified system of bus funding that could deliver routes where there is a local need. Funding is unequal and it is fractured. Somerset Council receives around £25 per head of funding for buses, while 12 local authorities across the country get double this amount. Now, the former Transport Secretary, who recently announced a big increase in bus funding, with Somerset Council receiving £6.5 million. Now, while this increase is very welcome, it won't go nearly far enough to fix the gaping holes in our bus provision. Somerset Council also awaits guidance from the government on what this money can be used for, so that they can prioritise where the need is greatest. Now, I know the previous Transport Secretary was keen for local authorities to decide where the money is most needed, and I hope that this remains the case. Madam Deputy Speaker, the government's vision for the future of buses appears to be based around franchising and delivering London-style buses around the country. Now, as I stated earlier, better buses are key to achieving a modal shift, hitting net zero targets and delivering opportunity and growth. But with the local authority landscape as it is, franchising simply isn't an option in rural areas. If there is not significant funding, franchising is no more than a pipe dream for rural authorities. Somerset Council only has 3 officers to deal with public transport, which isn't enough people power to run such an operation. Now, this isn't an anomaly. This is a local authority standard. So, if this doesn't work for rural areas, what is the vision? I hope that the recent removal of the £2 bus fare cap is not the start of things to come for rural areas. The nature of rural bus routes means that journeys are longer, people travel further, and if now the £3 cap were to be removed, it would be disastrous for rural areas, as prices would rise beyond affordable rates very quickly and disincentivise regular bus patronage. After the 50% fare increase, one constituent from North Cadbury wrote to me concerned about the impact it will have on the future of the number 1 bus from Yeovil to Shepton Mallet and the number 58 in Wincanton, which are both facing cancellation. These routes, and many like them, are vital for social and economic outcomes. Now, in the last parliamentary session, Madam Deputy Speaker, I introduced the Public Transport Rural Areas Bill that would have created minimum service levels, ensuring residents can access sites of employment, education and leisure. And I believe that these measures are truly needed for rural areas. Now, local authorities... Yes, I will, of course.
I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Lady for giving way, and I would just like to ask her to confirm that she does accept that the previous government had not actually funded the bus cap of £2 beyond the current level, and so therefore what we actually have is a cap on bus fares in order for people not to end up with exponential fare rises for the future for the next spending period.
I thank the honourable member for her intervention. I think the point that I want to make here is that if prices go up any further, patronage on buses go down, and that is absolutely paramount in rural areas where we travel further and travel longer. To incentivise people to use buses in rural areas is a very difficult thing to do. So I think that we need to ensure that we get this right for rural areas, and increasing fares is not going to help us encourage more people to get out of their cars and use public transport. So local authorities have a duty to outline routes that cannot run commercially but are vital to improve social outcomes or support economic activity, but there is no duty on them to fund these routes. Now, there were suggestions after the general election that the government would create safeguards to make it harder for routes to be cut, and the Better Bus Bill is the perfect opportunity to deliver this. The previous government committed to delivering guidance on the meaning and role of social necessary services, expanding the category to include economically necessary services. But unsurprisingly, they failed to provide this, leaving much-needed bus routes in danger. And I hope the Minister could take this up and provide some guidance ongoing. So, in conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, improving public transport is essential. The government has stated its intention to improve it, But so much remains unclear, especially for rural areas which see poor services and high costs. Unfortunately, without investment and smart choices being made, this will continue to be the reality. The reversal of these trends is crucial, and I look forward to hearing the Minister's response. Thank you.
The question is, as on the order paper, I call Alex Mayer to make her maiden speech.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm delighted to be called to give my maiden speech, and I do so with a sense of trepidation and excitement, as I imagine that many a new MP feels. Though it has struck me in recent times that maiden speeches are a little bit like buses. You wait ages and then 335 of them turn up at once. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I beg your indulgence to listen to one more as we near the end of this particular journey. As honourable members will know, the very excellent House of Commons Library helpfully provide us with the last two maiden speeches of our predecessors to enable us to get a feel for this place and acknowledge the work of those who came before us. Mr Selous served for a whopping 23 years, and I pay tribute to his work as an assiduous constituency representative who stood up for what he believed in. Now, I discovered in his maiden speech that he, in turn, referred to his predecessor, who served for 31 years, who in turn harked back to the member who came before him, the last Labour MP for the area, who was elected back in 1966. Clearly, 1966 was a year that was rather good, I think, for teams in red, albeit followed by rather too many years of hurt. But also, and importantly, I think that this history shows us how rarely change comes for these communities. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, change is desperately needed. Whether it is shoplifting, where I've met workers who have been spat at, threatened with needles and even a gun, a lack of healthcare facilities, including in Houghton Regis and Leighton Linslade, sewage, polluting our waterways, and transport, where I'm now delighted to be a member of the Transport Select Committee and which is the subject of the debate today. And I congratulate the member for Glastonbury and Somerton on securing this important debate. My constituency has a long history of transport innovation. It's got Britain's oldest road, dating back to prehistoric times, the Icknield Way. It runs through the constituency. It has the Grand Union Canal, the freight superhighway of its day. Leighton Buzzard Railway, which once transported sand from quarries and is now a much-loved tourism attraction, going, indeed, full steam ahead. And more recently, one of the longest guided busways in Europe, which I hope one day could be extended. Which brings me neatly to the topic of buses and encouraging more people to switch on to them, which is so vital in this time of climate emergency. I welcome the BSIP investment announced recently by the government and look forward to hearing more from the Minister about plans to allow more local areas to have a smoother path to franchising. I would also be keen that the Minister looks carefully at transport governance. London and Greater Manchester, which have franchising already, have also historically had alignment of transport powers, resources and capacity all in one centralised place. Passenger transport executives and their equivalents can accelerate delivery of transport plans and play a crucial role in unlocking regional economic growth. For 50 years, such structures have benefited from much higher levels of control and coordination of buses, and they also benefit from running over a much more logical functional economic geography. But outside of these areas, transport powers are held in many different places, and currently require a number of organisations to independently agree reforms to enact change. This can mean, for example, bus stops, which are surely the window to the soul of buses, can be owned by an organisation with no say in how the bus service itself is run. And in many places in the country, highways and transport powers are split. We perhaps need more passenger transport executives. Though the Urban Transport Group advised that the last passenger transport executive was established so long ago, although not quite as long ago as the last Labour MP for Dunstable and Leighton Buzzard, that the mechanics around establishing a new one is unclear. In any case, we need governance that's fit for the 21st century, with the right delegated functions being granted to a passenger transport executive or equivalent, and the establishment of an executive function to speed up decision-making and delivery, which makes the difference. And they need to be on a geography that reflects travel patterns, as well as wider social and economic geographies, and which gives a large enough base for raising fare box income. On geography, I would argue that there need to be possibilities to franchise in areas larger than local transport authorities. And given that I would also say that franchising is not entirely a silver bullet, I would also urge the Minister to look at the geography of enhanced partnerships as well. It's one bus, but the F70 bus, travelling from Luton to Milton Keynes via Dunstable and later Buzzard, it goes through 3 separate enhanced partnership areas. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I would like to thank Grant Palmer, Arriva and First, who have invited me aboard their buses recently, and Dawson Group for bringing a double-decker bus just outside Parliament for Catch the Bus Month, which many honourable members from across the House came to support. But it is my belief that really every month should be Catch the Bus Month. So I would urge all honourable members to get on board and to back all our local buses all year round.
I call John Milne.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Thank you very much for your maiden speech. That was lovely to hear. And you kept on the theme of buses as well, which is very impressive. There's a puzzle with rural bus services that needs to be solved. If you ask local residents, they'll tell you they're all desperate to save their village bus service from closure. Yet when you ask the local operator, you'll find that year on year, footfall keeps going down and there simply isn't enough public subsidy to fill the gap. If everyone wants to use the bus, why aren't they actually doing it? The answer is a mix of 2 things. Partly it's the price, but even more so, it's the service. Service frequency doesn't sufficiently meet the needs of residents, so they don't use it. Bus services have been in long decline ever since Thatcher's privatisation in the 1980s. While increased car use was always going to have an impact, that should have bottomed out years ago. In practice, what we have left today are mostly legacy routes, designed to answer the needs of communities from decades ago. What we've seen is a process of death by 1,000 cuts. Incremental cuts in frequency make the bus option less user-friendly every year. Across many villages in my constituency of Horsham, it's just not practical anymore to rely on buses as a way of getting to work. Over 80% of West Sussex residents, when surveyed in 2021, said they didn't use the bus due to a lack of route options or infrequency of services. Gradually, we see anyone who needs dependable public transport forced out of rural areas to be replaced by car users. That in turn reduces bus usage even further and the downward spiral continues. As a result, in Horsham and across West Sussex, for many years, the local authority has presided over a policy of managed decline with no serious attempt to reverse or at least stabilise things. Earlier this summer, the residents of Partridge Green, a village in the south of my constituency, were surprised to discover that they were about to lose their direct link to Horsham via the number 17 bus. They learned this with just a couple of weeks' notice. Nobody consulted them, nobody warned them. They only found it out by studying the new bus timetable when it was issued. Public anger was mainly directed at the local bus operator, but I would ask, what do we actually expect to happen? They're a private company. They need to make a profit, and the figures said this cut had to be made. We can't expect private companies to behave like social enterprises. Partridge Green residents reacted to the news with an impressive public campaign, which is still ongoing. I attended a large public meeting which had a fair percentage of the entire population of the village crammed into the local church. One of the things said really struck me, which was that if only they had known this service was in danger, they would have got together to help it, either by using the bus more frequently themselves or finding some other compromise. But West Sussex County Council gave them no warning, so they never had a chance. And this is the killer app we're missing out on. We need to harness the passion of communities to protect their local amenities. Loss of bus services isn't the only problem they face. Villages are suffering from removal of banking services, shops, pharmacies, post office, pubs, you name it. They know they're in a battle. but they're also really motivated to help if only we actually ask them. And that is potentially part of the answer to the long-term decline in service. We need to start by asking what kind of service residents actually want and what they would use if it actually existed. I welcome government promises of increased local funding and control over public transport. But I hope the government will be realistic in its assessment of local authority capability when 2/5 of councils are on the verge of bankruptcy. We've been fighting a long defensive battle, and frankly, we've been losing. If we're to have any hope of reversing that, we need to have a mechanism to go back to the people who actually live in these villages today and reconstruct the services from the ground up. Thank you.
Will Starn.
Deputy Speaker, and I thank the honourable member from Glastonbury and Somerton for bringing this forward. I would like to say that when I originally signed up to speak in this debate, it was supposed to be for the South West. I don't know what changed, but obviously national transport is very important. I do feel that the South West does sometimes get missed in the conversations, but I am hoping with the appointment of my right honourable friend in Swindon South, that's going to change a little bit. So it's going to be no shock after we've heard some of the speeches today that I'm going to talk about rural transport and the need for integration. And it's kind of an odd one for me. So my constituency of Swindon North has an urban area of Swindon, and then we have a rural area which is Inglesham, Highworth, Blunsdon, Castle Leighton. And these areas are completely different. And it's so odd that we have one bus company, and in the urban area of Swindon, we get it right. I don't get complaints from residents outside, sometimes in Queen's Drive, saying that there's a double-decker looking into their garden, but there's still a double-decker going past. When it comes to speaking to the rural residents, they often raise the point that they want to use public transport, they need to use public transport, it's good for their children, for education, it's good to have access to hospitals and to get into the town centre, but they simply can't. This is forcing them to use cars. I will keep this speech brief because we've got lots of members that want to talk today. But would the House agree with me that if we are going to incentivise people to ditch the car and get on public transport, we need an integrated transport system which focuses on rural areas, making sure that we can get access to buses when we need? Thank you.
I call Zoe Franklin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm very grateful to the honourable member for her debate on this important topic. So as the member for Guildford constituency, I could probably bore for the southeast of England when it comes to the public transport challenges we face, but I also recognise that actually we do have, comparatively with colleagues across the House, very good public transport, but it still isn't good enough, and my residents are regularly getting in touch with me to tell me so. So too long our transport networks have been neglected by the previous government, leaving transport users frustrated by delays, poor accessibility and high costs. And for us to achieve the greener, fairer, more thriving future that I'm sure all of us here want to have for our communities, then high quality public transport is absolutely essential. In my constituency of Guildford, we have two long proposed railway stations, Guildford West and Merrow. These stations were first suggested 10 years ago, and we've had barely any progress. The main reason? Funding, or rather lack of funding. For those not in the know, building this railway station costs upwards of 25 million, with at least half of it needing to be spent on planning before a single shovel breaks the ground. This financial barrier has left residents waiting for far longer than they should for essential infrastructure. And yet, even as we struggle to deliver new stations, existing ones remain inaccessible for too many across our communities. Of course, I am talking about the issue of step-free access. In my own constituency, stations like Clarendon, Effingham Junction and Horsley still lack that basic accessibility for my residents to be able to access the train in their rural area. Instead, they have to go to other larger places like Guildford and Dorking. We must support those in wheelchairs, but step-free access is also about making life easier for parents of prams, people with invisible mobility challenges, and anyone who finds steps a barrier. Without doing so, we prevent people from choosing greener transport, from choosing public transport. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is a matter of fairness and inclusion, but just like new stations, it comes with a significant price tag. With the news this week that South Western Rail will be moving back into public ownership next year, it is my sincere hope that these urgent improvements we need will start to take place and we will see an end to accessibility deserts. But railways are just one part of the public transport puzzle. In the villages of my constituency, and like many semi-rural areas and rural areas as well, buses are a lifeline for residents and for businesses. Yet far too often these routes are being cut, services are deeply unreliable, and communities are being left isolated. From our extensive experience in local governments, the Liberal Democrat benches know that local solutions work best. That's why personally I would like to see the government look at empowering borough, district, town and parish councils to be able to run their own localised bus services, not just the county level transport authorities. These councils know their communities and can deliver targeted services that people need. Specifically when it comes to town and parish councils, I've spoken to colleagues running some of the larger parish and town councils, and they would at least like the opportunity to consider commercial shuttle bus services. They have, some of them, the financial potential to do so, but they can't, because currently it would be illegal to do so, and it is within the gift of the government to change this. I have campaigned for many, many years, along with so many of my Liberal Democrat colleagues, for solutions to our public transport woes. But ultimately, I just want to return to the fact that my constituency, like so many others, our residents completely understand the frustrations that everyone across the country shares on the delays and the difficulties that come from public transport being inadequate. The answer is, of course, investment. And I've said it before to colleagues on the government benches, please don't be shy. Borrow our ideas, and with our ideas from our manifestos, always fully costed, we can deliver railway stations, we can deliver step-free access, we can deliver buses for residents, communities and business, so that our communities can thrive. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Simon Opher.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Honourable Member for Glastonbury and Somerton for bringing this debate, and also can I commend my honourable friend from Dunstable and Leighton Buzzard on her maiden speech. Excellent. So, public transport and buses is a bit of a passion of mine. I'm from Stroud, and I have many small villages in my constituency, in Dursley and Wootton Under Edge, just to name but two, and it's actually more than infrastructure and transport. It represents a whole range of opportunities. It's about equality and it's about community. And it's really particularly true about rural areas because it tends to run as a lifeline for a lot of local residents. Under successive Conservative governments, rural bus services have been run down, and it's interesting actually today to see the interest in public transport from the opposite benches. There's been a staggering 27% reduction in bus services since 2011, and indeed in rural areas there's a £420 million shortfall in this. But I'm really encouraged to answer the honourable lady's questions, is that we're actually investing £1 billion into improving bus services, including £8 million designated for Gloucestershire. Can I just, as a little aside, just mention a station that used to, a Stroud Water station that used to be a station, was cut in the 1960s, and I agree with the Honourable Lady about these small railway stations. They do cost a lot to develop, but this will be a fantastic thing. When money allows, and when we've got ourselves out of our financial hole, we should invest in the railways and small stations. So the impact of almost 4 decades of deregulation on our public transport system has made a lot of communities absolutely stripped of any public transport at all, and certainly any accessibility and affordable bus services. So I'm delighted that this government plans to restore power to local communities, enabling local leaders to set fares, determine routes and establish timetables, taking control away from unaccountable private operators. However, I do urge the Minister to confirm that rural areas without an elected mayor will also have equal opportunities to benefit from this shift towards community-controlled bus services. I'd just like to briefly highlight, in my area, in Wootton-under-Edge, they had a lifeline of a bus service, the 84-85 service, going south to Bristol. Now, the problem with this service is it crossed a boundary line between a combined authority and between Gloucestershire. And the cancellation of this service has actually caused havoc. It's caused havoc for school children. People can't get to work, people can't get to doctor's surgeries, and people can't get to hospitals. So, and actually, people have written to me saying they've had to turn down job offers, and that's how important rural bus services are. So, I'd like to just flag a key issue in this case was the lack of coordination between local authorities. It seems petty, but this is a major problem, I feel. And the 84-85 cross-border service, because its funding was lost because local leaders failed to reach an agreement. And that's how fragmentation can really affect rural public transport. And I'd like to just end, actually, one of the pleasures of my week is I leave this place, take the train to Stroud, and then get on my favourite bus, the 65. I sit on the top, and I ride over Selsley Common to my home. It's an absolute joy, and it's also a joy that's shared by my 2-year-old granddaughter, who absolutely loves buses. So let's develop rural public transport and get it back to what it was in the past. Thank you.
Yeah. I call Claire Young.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you to my honourable friend for bringing this debate. Our public transport services have been run down for years under the previous Conservative government, with many rural communities across my Thornbury and Yate constituency having seen their vital bus services disappear. To rub it in, to rub salt into the wound, we've seen money spent on gimmicks more aimed at delivering headlines rather than actually saving the services we rely upon. My constituents were looking forward to this new government to offer them hope, yet in one of their first actions they chose to hike the bus fare cap, so vital in rural areas where journeys are long and fractured, and only committing to it for the next year. I do welcome the announcement of more funding for those services that are subsidised by combined and local authorities, but for it to be effective, this must be targeted at delivering a restoration of our rural services rather than being funnelled into already well-served urban areas. What we've seen in the west of England is that funding has been prioritised for urban areas like Bristol, where increasing the frequency of services boosts passenger journeys more. As long as the focus is purely on passenger journey numbers, rather than ensuring everyone has a basic minimum service enabling access to work, education and health services, our rural areas will miss out. One of the half-baked solutions to the reduction in mainstream regular scheduled services has been to roll out an on-demand bus service called Westlink. Now, while on-demand services can work, locally it is being used to do far more than any on-demand service can reasonably be expected to do, and the delivery of a service has been poor. Bad experiences have led to people losing confidence in it. No one wants to be stranded and have to pay a fortune for a taxi. As a result, I've had people tell me that they've booked it to get from A to B, only to find they're the only passenger on board. However, the situation is even more ridiculous when you consider that some Westlink services are filling the gap left by axing former bus routes that children and teenagers used to get to school or college. This means that parents are having to repeatedly call up to book what should be a consistent daily service to get young people to and from their pace of learning. It's simply a waste of time and resources being managed in this way. To quote one parent, I know there is a Westlink available to book every day, but with the Westlink only able to have a small number of passengers, and it's never on time or takes us somewhere completely different before taking us to school. It's leaving parents with the fear of being fined. I've tried in vain to raise this issue with the West of England Authority, both in my time in this place and in my previous role as the leader of South Gloucestershire Council, but each time we're met with the same answer: there's no funding. This shows the core weakness with the current system, with routes that are commercially sustainable being run by bus companies who absorb the profits, and those less used but equally important rural routes left in the hands of local authorities. We know that local government has seen their funding cut to the bone by more than a decade of Conservative rule in Westminster. They simply cannot magic up extra money to keep these buses running. When I raised the issue of funding being used to provide minimum service levels for rural areas in this House a few weeks ago, the then Transport Secretary, the Honourable Member for Sheffield Heeley, agreed with me. So I hope the Minister will echo that today. I hope too that the Minister will agree that whether or not new franchising powers are taken up, and my honourable friend has highlighted the difficulties, local councillors should be involved in decision making. As a councillor for many years, I know how valuable their local knowledge can be in avoiding disastrous route and timetable changes that make sense to those sitting in the bus operator's office. In my own local area, the Yate District Transport Forum is a good example of local representatives working with operators. But all too often, councillors find out about changes at the same time as residents, when it's too late to intervene. And I also want to agree with the Honourable Member for Stroud about the need for an understanding that whatever geography you choose for governing transport services, some people will want to cross that boundary. And as he raised, in the case of the 84-85, that's a significant number of people. I too have had similar messages about the inability to get to jobs, the impact on people travelling to Catherine Lady Berkeley School, and so forth. So I think it's important that the Minister brings clarity to the issue of cross-boundary services. So to finish, I'd just like to briefly touch on the issue of railways. We are lucky enough to have some local lines and rail services in my area, but there's no joined-up approach that ensures that if you live in a village like Hawkesbury Upton, that you can get a bus to the railway station in Yate, and that if there is a bus that it will get you there in time to link up with the next scheduled train. This lack of ecosystem holds us back and means our services operate disjointedly. That's why people simply don't feel they can rely on public transport to get around. And more than that, we need to increase rail services, which is why I've been pushing for the reopening of stations at Charfield, Colbert Heath, for a new solution for people travelling to the growing number of jobs at Sevenside, and for the government to guarantee funding to keep half-hourly trains running through Yate. All in all, we need a clear and connected plan to improve our public transport network, fix the rot that set in after years of Conservative cuts and neglect, and ensure everyone has a regular service they can depend upon.
Mark Sewards.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Can I say what a pleasure it is to follow the maiden speech from the Honourable Member for Dunstable and Leighton Buzzard. And I'd also like to congratulate the Member for Glastonbury and Somerton for securing this debate. Public transport in Leeds South West and Morley is a lifeline for many of my constituents and me. I'm going to focus on bus travel today because it's the #1 transport issue that my constituents contact me about. I have plenty of content on the railway and the trams, but I'll leave that for another time. Now, without bus travel, many in more rural communities, like those in Ardsley, Robin Hood, Thorpe and Lofthouse in my constituency, simply would not have the means to travel to access essential services. It's a point that's been made by other members in this debate. In Farnley and Wortley, at the other side of my constituency, we're dependent on a small number of bus services to get us around, which leaves us far more exposed when those bus services fail. And in Morley, despite it being the largest population centre in my constituency, it is absolutely not immune to all of the problems we have come to associate with bus travel. In fact, I'm speaking as somebody who has relied heavily on the bus service in Cherwell and in Morley. The 51 and the 52 used to get me to school 20 years ago. I remember being frustrated even then at the service, and I swore that if I was ever in a position to do something about it, I would. So that's why I am very grateful to be able to contribute to this debate today, and also to be part of this Labour government. Now, we need a public transport system that we can rely on. We need to try something different because the status quo so obviously isn't working. If I can just turn back to Ardsley and Robin Hood, the council ward in my constituency, it has no town centre and it's in a very remote location, parts of it are at least, so buses are essential for residents to get around without a car. We don't have reliable routes into Leeds city centre either, and despite all of this, routes keep being cut and have been cut very recently by a private provider, and residents have been left isolated. This includes the 212 service that goes through East Ardsley into Tingley and then right through to Wakefield city centre. Now, fortunately, thanks to the work of the local councillors and the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, we have managed to find a new provider for that route in January. Obviously, that counts as a victory for local residents, but we can't just be reliant on sticking plaster solutions like this one. We can't just scramble around to find new private providers every time somebody cuts a bus route. And that is also not to say, by the way, that all private bus companies are bad, far from it. In my previous role as a councillor for Farnley and Wortley, I was very happy to work with First in Leeds to deal with antisocial behaviour on the number 42 route that went through my ward. I'm so grateful for their work and the work of the police because we managed to end those incidents of antisocial behaviour and restore that bus route. That company has always been willing to engage with me on issues around their bus routes, even if they weren't able to solve the problems. However, I don't want to be reliant on the hope that every private provider is as willing to engage with me as First has been. We all know that private providers have to cut routes that are not profitable or subsidised, or if they go bankrupt, even if those routes are essential to vulnerable communities. That's why we need the long-term solution. Our region, Yorkshire, West Yorkshire, is very fortunate to have Mayor Tracy Braben, who has put public transport at the heart of her mission to change how we get around our region. I very much welcome the news that the franchising system will be introduced in West Yorkshire in 2027. That date cannot come soon enough. It will give direct control over the bus companies and over the bus routes so that we can finally put people before profit when it comes to our public transport system. Now, Mayor Braben's work closely aligns with this government's strong commitment to fixing the broken bus networks across our country. The new buses bill will end the postcode lottery of bus services and deliver the biggest overhaul to our bus system in 40 years. And while this news is greeted by my constituents in Leeds South West and Morley, it is imperative that we can continue to ensure that the buses remain sustainable now. That's why I also welcome the £1 billion of investment recently announced by the government on bus funding. This includes the £36 million that we'll be getting for West Yorkshire, and it's helped us to extend the price cap to £2.50 all throughout 2025, and it's secured routes like the 212 that I talked about. And I would just suggest to the members opposite, and I do respect a lot of the points that they are making today, that the bus cap was going to be abolished, the bus fare cap was going to be abolished next year, and it was because of the actions of this government that a new cap has been introduced. Yes, it is higher, but it is a cap nonetheless, so that we can keep those exponential fare rises down. Now, I do predict that in Leeds, returning to Leeds, that the next 2 years are of vital importance to our bus network. As we build towards franchising in 2027, we must sustain a good level of service until that date and use every tool in our arsenal to do so. So I urge my constituents to continue to contact me with problems related to the bus network in Leeds South West and Morley. I will work with the councillors of every party in my constituency and the West Yorkshire Combined Authority to deal with problems that we are encountering before franchising. And I'd also ask the Minister today, who is one of my neighbours, who's now heard me set out all of the arguments and all of the problems in my constituency and some of the solutions as well, I ask him if I'm missing anything else that I can use to help me and to help my constituents in the build-up towards franchising in 2027, should problems arise before that date. To conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, we cannot understate the significance of effective public transport. Communities in Leeds South West and Morley rely upon it. I can tell them that we are genuinely getting on with the job of fixing our bus networks. It's time that my constituents have access to the public transport that they deserve.
Gideon Amos.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to congratulate the member for Dunstable and Leighton Buzzard for her excellent maiden speech, and it puts me in mind that when I was first elected, I thought it was difficult to get to know my 71 Liberal Democrat members until I realised the challenge on the benches opposite is considerably bigger in terms of getting to know new members, so I wish her well with that. I'd also like to congratulate my honourable friend and neighbour, member for Glastonbury and Somerton for securing this really important debate. And I'd also like to pay tribute to her work and that of her colleagues on Somerset Council over recent years in very difficult circumstances. The previous government may have introduced the bus fare cap, but that really didn't go far enough to outweigh the decimation of public transport and bus services over decades in this country, both from central government and Somerset County Council, which cut services throughout Somerset. For example, in 2019, shortly before the Liberal Democrats took control of Somerset, the Conservative County Council proposed closing the park and ride services in Taunton. Park and ride's obviously vital to the whole system of integrated public transport and was an innovation of the noughties built by a Liberal Democrat council and ultimately was planned for closure. But my colleagues running the district council stepped up, saved the park and ride service, restructured the fares structure, and it is now a profitable service again that doesn't require subsidy, which just shows that with a commitment to public transport, if the political will is there, these services can be made viable and can be sustained. And also, during these years of real challenge for local government, I'd like to credit Somerset Council for bringing back night buses, and I was really delighted to meet the first night bus out of Taunton. You can now travel between Taunton and Wellington in my constituency up until midnight every night on the weekday, and I was out there with Mike driving his first night bus last year, which is a fantastic improvement. Also reducing the fare cap in Taunton to £1, not just £2, and following the closure of the bus station, again following privatisation that my honourable friend, the member for Horsham, referred to, and their company selling off the bus station in Taunton, shockingly. I'm really delighted the council is now bringing forward plans for a transport hub once again in Taunton town centre, so people don't have to stand shivering on pavements getting rained on in the county town to catch buses. And I do credit the government for the £6 million of BSIP funding, Bus Service Improvement Programme funding, which is genuinely welcome. Obviously, we would have liked more, and it's disappointing to see the bus cap increase to £3, but as I think the Honourable Member for East Thanet rightly pointed out, there was no money pledged to support that service by the last government. So I understand the challenges, although we would have of course, taxed big banks, big energy companies more, as my friend, the Honourable Member for Guildford, pointed out, so that we could fund some of these things to a higher level. But as well as, before I leave bus services, I must just mention the fact that in my constituencies of Taunton and Wellington, there was one part of Somerset where young people, students, get no discount on their bus fare at all. So if you want to attend college as a sixth former in my part of Somerset, you have to pay £900 just to get there and back. And that is a prohibitively high bus fare to pay per year to get to college. And I'm working closely with councillors on Somerset Council. I hope it will be possible to bring forward a discount scheme for students in our parts of Somerset, as exists in other parts of Somerset and other parts of the country. But I want to move on, Madam Deputy Speaker, to the vital importance of rail in Taunton and Wellington and my part of Somerset. We have the fantastic West Somerset Steam Railway, which I invite you all to come and join, which takes us from Bishop's Lydia, just outside Taunton, down to Minehead, the famous Butlins. I know you all want to go there and enjoy the steam journey over there. And a strategic outline business case has recently been submitted by the West Somerset Railway to Department for Transport to connect that railway with Taunton Station. So it would have a mainline station connection, and it would mean that you could also have that commuter service to Bishop's Lydeard on the edge of Taunton, which would both provide commuter transport but also direct access to one of the best heritage railways in the country. But perhaps more important than any of those things is the Wellington-Clumpton Station project. And I recognise there are station reopening projects across the country that members across the House will be championing as their favourite station. I have to say, though, that my understanding of the Wellington-Clumpton Station project is that because it is a two-station project and would deliver two stations in one, it has the best benefit cost ratio of any railway station reopening project in the country of 3.67. Now, I said that like I understand Treasury benefit cost ratio numbers. And I only wish it were true, Madam Deputy Speaker. But I'm reliably informed that anything above 1 is a really high level of benefit cost ratio. And on that ground alone, it should qualify for funding. And it would bring £3.3 million of benefit to the local economy. And after all, growth is, of course, absolutely vital to the whole country. And a project such as reopening Wellington Station would unlock thousands of homes around Wellington. We have a town council in Wellington that wants Wellington to thrive and grow, and bringing that railway station, which was very close to getting shovels in the ground. In July, the project had reached final business case. The detailed design was ongoing. There was a small amount of money needed to complete the detailed design, and then the government froze the whole programme. But I was assured by the Chancellor of the Exchequer at this dispatch box just here that's in July, in the budget debate, that this station would go ahead. And we are still waiting to hear why the most financially beneficial station reopening project in the country is not yet got the go-ahead. And I'm very grateful for the meetings, 2 meetings we've had with the Rail Minister, Lord Hendy and the other place. I know the government is supportive and sympathetic, but we need this project to get back on track. I'm sorry, it's impossible to avoid railway puns in this, but we need to get that project going again. It is so ready to be built. We have a lot of third-party funding coming in. The access road, the car park, all of that is funded by a third-party developer. At Clumpton as well, in the constituency, or in the neighbouring constituency, has similar third-party funding going into it. So we urgently need that project to go ahead. And if we're going to secure the economic growth that Somerset needs, we have lost £2 billion worth of transport projects over the last few months. The A303 has been cancelled, the A358 has been cancelled. We desperately need a bypass for villages of Thornfalcon and Henlade, which that A358 project would have completed. But with all this projects being taken away, surely it is time that we should see the Wellington-Clumpton Station project with its excellent economic growth impacts funded. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Dr. Scott Arthur.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to thank the honourable member for Glastonbury and Somerton for thanking and congratulating her for bringing forward this debate. She's created a safe space where all us tram, bus and train nerds can come together without fear of persecution. We should be grateful for that. And it's also great to share this session with my honourable colleague from Dunstable and Leighton, Buzzard, and she's already proved herself to be a very diligent member of the Transport Select Committee, and I congratulate her on her maiden speech today. Well done. Well done. So this is a welcome debate. It feels like in the few years running up to the general election, it felt like in the public discourse about transport, it felt like we're stuck in a narrative about cyclists versus drivers, as if these people aren't the same people a lot of the time, and also about LTNs, when really what we should have been speaking about was public transport. If we're serious about growing the economy, cutting congestion, reducing the climate emissions, and also creating a more equal society, we should be talking about public transport generally, and I would say buses specifically. Now, I think speeches so far, we've been focusing quite a lot on things which aren't quite working. So I want to talk about something which is working, and that's the bus service in Edinburgh, and hopefully we can draw some lessons from that. It's not perfect, it's not without its challenges, and it can always be better, but it is a pretty good service. And you know, people coming to London for the first time, one of the things that defines London for them is the tube. It's the memory they take away and they speak to people about, and they buy T-shirts and all the rest of it. In Edinburgh, it's the buses. It's one of the things that I always say it defines the city just as much as the castle does, the excellent bus service that we have. So what is it like? You can travel on any route in the city as far as you like for £2, so we have that £2 cap. The drivers have amongst the best pay in the country. The workforce is heavily unionised. I think the union membership is well over 90%. And that's not a challenge. They work in complete partnership with the managing director and the management team. And in fact, you know, it's a really good example, actually. And I have the Longston, Lothian Buses, Longston Garage in my constituency. And the staff there were absolutely key to Lothian Buses becoming the bus operator of the year in the UK. And I would like to invite the Minister, of course, to come along and visit the garage and meet the staff and the management team at his convenience. And what I always say about Edinburgh, if you get on the bus, you can see all of Edinburgh. And of course, I mean the fantastic views, the castle, which isn't quite in my constituency, but you can see it from a bus in my constituency. So I will claim it. But also the people, because the people that use the bus service in Edinburgh are a complete cross-section of the population. You know, young, old, rich and less affluent people, they're all there together on the bus, which is a fantastic thing, actually. And not every city can claim that. And in terms of the view from the bus, my honourable friend from Stroud did point out that the views from his bus are fantastic from the top deck. I do have to say that the best seat in the bus is on the top deck, but it's right at the front above the driver. That is the best seat in the bus. So I just want to get that on the record. Absolutely. So, and I consider there's broad agreement on that, so not very controversial, which is excellent. And the other thing what happens with the bus service in Edinburgh is that there's no real subsidy from the local authority or the government, really, apart from for older people and younger people. And actually, it provides a dividend to the council which owns the service. So last year, it gave £3 million dividend back to the city. So a bus service, which is a fantastic service, cheap, well-paid staff, and it actually pays a dividend back to its owner. So what is the secret to success? Of course, I would say it's public ownership. So I don't think all these things are a coincidence, and it just happens to be I don't think all these things happened, and it just happens to be publicly owned. I think that's at the heart of it. And it's because there's an unwritten social contract between the Lothian buses and the city. And what they provide is a network which supports the city as a whole. They don't, like a private operator would, they don't just focus on routes which make them lots of money and forget about the rest of the city. They provide a network, and there's a kind of a cross-subsidy within that network where less viable routes are supported by the more well-used routes. And I think that is a really important thing, particularly if we want to create more equal cities using transport. So, but what I would say is, you know, what's been really powerful since the election is the discussion around franchising, you know, in England. We already have those powers in Scotland, but I think in a lot of, it's taking time for them to be fully used, and there's funding issues there as well. But you can see there's real excitement right across England around the use of franchising powers. And my honourable friend from Dunstable, Leighton, Buzzard, she did make the case for getting the balance of those powers absolutely right, so we can move forward with those schemes at pace. And that is really important. But I would also say that it's not just about giving local authorities franchising powers and even the funding and the powers to deliver those services quickly. The other thing we have to think about is make sure our local authorities and local leaders are able to put priority measures in place on the ground for our buses to move around the city quickly. So that means bus lanes, and it means priority measures through junctions so we can keep people moving. In Edinburgh, there's much more we need to do on this, and we do repeatedly ask the Scottish Government for more funding to make that happen faster. But in Edinburgh, around 40% of trips inside the city are on bus. But if you look at the percentage of the road space which is allocated to just buses, it's absolutely tiny. And every square metre of that is hard fought. So I just want to conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, by saying that franchising alone won't solve this. I think we have to support the deployment of these schemes right across the UK. And what that means, when it does come to bus lanes and priority measures and junctions, we do have to think about the economy, congestion, climate, and creating that more equal city, and not be too reactionary, and think about the benefits a better bus service can bring to us all, and actually engage the community in consultation on that basis. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
I call Andy MacNae.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. First of all, congratulations to Thornbury for securing this important debate, and what a pleasure it was to hear my colleague from Dunstable and Leighton Buzzard's maiden speech. Wonderful stuff. As many of us have done, I massively welcome this debate. It's a hugely important topic. Public transport is vital not only for the connectivity and economic growth of our communities, but for the very well-being of our residents. For so many who cannot afford a car, public transport is a lifeline, allowing them to get to work, to school, to see friends and family, to visit doctors and hospitals. Without good, reliable public transport links, our communities will suffer, as so many, sadly, in my constituency of Rossendale, Darwen do today. It's vital that we get to grips with this issue, so I'm so encouraged by the work the government has done so far in this area. Beginning the work of rebuilding our public transport links after the stark disinterest of the previous government. I welcome, of course, a Transpennine route upgrade, which will ensure our key towns in the north are better connected with faster and more frequent trains. With this greater connectivity and mobility, we can begin to address the constraints that have held back our northern economy for many years. Alongside this, I'm pleased to see the commitment to a further £650 million for transport links outside of cities. This is much needed, with lines like those serving Darwen in my constituency crying out for improvement as they suffer constant cancellations and delays. And I'm also hopeful this will be an opportunity to address left-behind areas like Rossendale, where 1 in 4 of my residents commute into Manchester, and yet we're the only local authority area in the north without any sort of commuter rail link. This results in 79% of journeys being by car, with all the resultant congestion and air pollution that comes from it. The City Valley Rail link proposed by our Borough Council and County Councils would be an absolute game changer for our local economy. It would take 500,000 cars off the road and potentially enable up to 5,000 jobs. To me, it's a definition of a no-brainer and exactly the sort of example of the connectivity issues that we need to address if we are going to genuinely deliver on our growth mission. Similarly, I'm delighted to see the government's recent commitment to £1 billion of funding to support our local bus networks. There is in my constituency receiving millions of pounds in support, and we can now begin the vital work of strengthening our bus routes, many of which have faced years of unending cutbacks. In my constituency, villages like Edgeworth, Edenfield and Weir have long felt cut off, and we need to judge the value of restoring these connections, not just simply in terms of short-term passenger numbers, but with consideration to all the social, well-being and economic benefits that come from connecting remote communities with the services, training and employment opportunities they need. I've recently written to Lancashire County Council and Blackburn with Darwen councils, calling on the leadership to work with me to make sure the new funding is used to address these long-standing connectivity issues. I'd like to reiterate that call now. And in Rossendale and Darwen, these bus services are compounded by cross-border challenges, and I'm so pleased to see other colleagues recognising that really fundamental issue. Many key services in my area cross between Lancashire, West Yorkshire and Greater Manchester. These local government areas have not traditionally worked well together, and we've suffered from that lack of joined-up thinking. So we cannot discuss improving transport links without also discussing improvement to local authority structures. As we're seeing in Manchester, with the B network, an empowered mayor and effective combined authority can turbocharge the development of efficient, reactive and joined-up and innovative transport infrastructure that serves their residents and grows their economies. Yet in counties like Lancashire, with an out-of-date two-tier structure and no mayor, we lack a strong voice and coherent, joined-up transport strategy. This is why it's a pressing need, central to any efforts to tangibly improve public transport, to pursue fully-fledged devolution deals for every area in the country. Only with empowered local leaders working together, able to quickly recognise both local needs and opportunities, can we have a sort of public transport system that our country and my residents in Rossendale and Darwen need.
Natasha Irons.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and may I congratulate the Honourable Member from Glastonbury and Somerton for securing this debate, and congratulate my friend, the Member for Dunstable and Leighton Buzzard, for her maiden speech. It's an exciting thing to get off the list. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm fortunate enough to be a Londoner. And not just any Londoner, but a Londoner lucky enough to be from the south of the river, which is the right side, and
southeast even,
who had the good sense to marry a northerner. So there you go. So I know that as a Londoner who grew up with a well-integrated, well-run and efficient public transport system, when I raise issues around underinvestment from the government into our services, that there will be colleagues here who represent constituencies like the one that my husband grew up in, who have to wait for about an hour for their bus to the nearest town, and will have very little sympathy for this whinging Londoner. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, 14 years of failure from the previous government has left public transport in every part of our country failing to keep pace with the needs of the people that rely on it. Under their watch, cancelled train journeys rose to a record high, passengers having to navigate 55 million different types of ticket options, buses driving 300 million fewer miles per year compared to 2010. And for our corner of South London, the previous government's mismanagement led to cancelled schemes, failed projects and accessibility for passengers being ignored. Croydon is London's most populated borough, with a projected population growth of 7.9% by 2041. And in my constituency last year, East Croydon Station had over 20 million journeys passing through its gates, making it the 21st most used station in Great Britain. But for my constituents, using East Croydon Station means dealing with congestion, antisocial behaviour and a failed footbridge project, which is now known locally as the Bridge to Nowhere. The project, originally designed to improve accessibility to the station, has been beset by delays and caused endless frustration for residents. And after a decade of inaction, local taxpayers' money going into the project, Network Rail has now downgraded their plans and removed direct access to platforms, causing more frustration for passengers, more congestion at the station and insult to injury for my community. Under the previous government, the Croydon Area Remodelling Scheme, a scheme designed to address congestion on the Brighton main line and upgrade Croydon's train stations, was shelved. Without this scheme going ahead, Norwood Junction Station in my constituency, the 79th busiest station in Britain, will now not get the investment that it desperately needs. No improvement to platforms, no improvement to services, and no improvement to accessibility, with the addition of a new lift being deemed as too complicated by Network Rail without the wider improvements in the scheme. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I welcome this government's commitment to improving public transport across every part of our country, to putting passengers first and to working with our regional mayors and not against them. Because not only does that mean more regions in our country benefiting from public control of bus networks, train services with fewer delays, for my constituency, it means a Labour government working with a Labour mayor to finally give us the trams we so desperately need. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, yes, I am fortunate to be a Londoner who had all the access to all the transport that I could possibly need. But with the government investing in every region, we can do so much more.
And the final backbench speech, Polly Billington.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And thank you very much to the an honourable lady from Glastonbury and Somerton for securing this debate, and particularly for my honourable friend from Daventry and Leighton Buzzard, who showed the depth of her knowledge and understanding of this important debate. I have to say, though, I do have an observation, Madam Deputy Speaker, about the benches opposite. It appears you wait all day for a Tory MP to turn up to a debate on public transport, and none do. I'm also pleased that, with the exception, of course, of the front bench, who is obliged to be there. I'm also grateful that the definition of this debate, the scope of this debate was widened beyond the West Country, since I represent the second most eastern constituency in the country, the far eastern corner of the Isle of Thanet. Now, hundreds of years ago, including up to the Tudor times, we were cut off from the rest of the country by the River Wantsum. And I fear it is actually the legacy of the party opposite that they tried their best to effectively reinstate our island status by gutting our public transport and cutting us off from the rest of the country. Fortunately, however, Madam Deputy Speaker, when it comes to trains, there is a Labour government legacy. Thanks particularly to the support and involvement of my predecessor, Stephen Leighton, the MP for South Thanet and a Transport Minister, and of course the late, great John Prescott, they made enormous progress with connectivity and public transport, salvaging the high-speed rail project that my constituency benefits from so much, linking us up with London and the rest of the UK with all of the economic benefits that follow. I have to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, that I and others, including my constituents and colleagues from across Kent, would also strongly advocate for the return of international services to Ashford on the high-speed rail line because of all of the economic benefits that this would deliver. Now, it is already on the record, Madam Deputy Speaker, that in Kent we have seen a massive reduction in bus services under the last government, with 20% fewer bus miles than under the last Labour government. The government's announcement on bus funding is extremely welcome, especially as Kent has received the highest proportion of funding in the whole of the South East at £23 million. That funding, combined with the new powers for local authorities, means that Tory-run Kent County Council has the ability to reverse that cut in bus miles, and I implore them to use those powers and money to do so. Now, there may be people on the other side of the chamber, difficult to see, who are entirely unfamiliar with bus timetables as they all stick to their cars. But let me tell you, if you're an older person in Broadstairs, where huge swathes of the town have no access to bus services at all, you would be left to walk, cycle, or much more likely rely on lifts from friends and family or taxis. The sheer expense of having to rely on taxis as your primary mode of transport is enormous, unsustainable, and fundamentally unfair. This has created a situation where if someone becomes ill and is in need of NHS services, they are forced to pay for a taxi when they may not be able to afford it, or, as often happens, simply go without medical treatment. Now, this is particularly challenging as a lot of NHS services in East Thanet have been moved inland, which is an all too common issue in coastal communities like mine. For example, in East Kent, our orthopaedic centre is located in Canterbury. There is now no direct bus from Broadstairs or Ramsgate to Canterbury, meaning people with mobility issues face barriers to treatment, and for some it means taking time off work to make the extended journey. This has ramifications for our economy, as people who need treatment are left having to take time off work when they otherwise wouldn't. Often this forces people simply to go without treatment in the early stages, which can only make them sicker, and yet put more costs on the NHS further down the line. This is not only damaging to the sick people themselves, it stunts the economy and it puts excess strain on public services. But this is not the only way that a lack of public transport options hurts our economy. It impacts the regeneration of our local high streets. I have many constituents who would much prefer to do their shopping in person in our local high streets, contributing to our local economy. They now feel as though they have no option but to switch to online shopping because of the lack of transport options as they don't drive. And let me tell you, Madam Deputy Speaker, when I've suggested that there might be a possibility of a bus that connects Ramsgate train station to Ramsgate High Street, you would have thought from the faces of some people that I was asking to bend the laws of physics. We have been so used to the idea that this is simply impossible. Reliable, affordable, accessible, safe transport is a matter of social and economic justice. I applaud all the actions that the government is taking to regenerate our high streets, with a major issue which is a major issue in East Thanet, that the Ramsgate Empty Shops campaign is seeking to work with the government on. But if people cannot get to those high streets, I fear that we will not make the progress that we rightly want to. Now, I know that we have a significantly important new Secretary of State responsible for this, but I also remember that we need to think about the legacy of previous Secretaries of State, and particularly I would like to mention Barbara Castle in this regard. When she was first appointed by Harold Wilson, she did turn round to the Prime Minister at the time and say, "You do know, Harold, I can't drive." And in the late 60s, this was seen as some particular hamper to her being able to be a suitable Transport Secretary. But Harold Wilson, in his wisdom, said, "Yes, Barbara, exactly." And it is that is the point of and think of the changes that she was able to make, not only in public transport but also in road safety, that means that we have got a strong legacy that has lasted all of my lifetime, and I hope much further beyond that. So it is fundamental to achieving the government's missions that we have good public transport, in the same way that it is fundamental to us being able to live our own lives and achieve our own ambitions. Simply to get up, to go to work, to access the services we need, and to get home safely, and to see the people that we love.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Paul Kohler.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I commend the member for Dunstable and Leighton Buzzard on her excellent maiden speech, congratulate you on having the world's oldest roads and doubtless the world's oldest potholes as well. Can I also commend the honourable members for Horsham, for Swindon North, Guildford, Stroud, Thornbury and Yate, Leeds South West and Morley, Taunton and Wellington, Edinburgh South West, Rossendale and Darwen and East Thanet, who spoke with one voice on the dire state of public transport in many of our rural areas. Can I agree with my friend, the member from Croydon East? Before becoming transport spokesman, I didn't realise how lucky we were in London, and whilst our constituents do have legitimate complaints at times, we don't know how lucky we are in London, frankly. Can I also thank my honourable friend for Glastonbury and Somerton for securing this debate? And can I echo the question to the Minister regarding the disruption, particularly the question to the Minister regarding the disruption to commuters from the South West caused by the HS2 works on Old Oak Common, and what can be done to minimise that disruption? As we've heard from colleagues across the House, the current state of public transport is simply not good enough. Ticket prices are too high, services too unreliable, infrastructure too old and capacity too meagre. And that is only talking about those who have access to public transport. Too many parts of our country have no meaningful access to public transport whatsoever. After years of routes being cut and timetables foreshortened, many no longer have access to a regular bus service, despite living many miles distant from any rail network. This is hampering our economy, holding back local communities, damaging our high streets. Our public transport system should be the engine of growth and opportunity, not an impediment to them. If we are to reach the government's targets on economic growth and net zero, we must take rapid and urgent steps to improve our public transport provision. We simply do not have time to tarry. Now, let me be clear. My party and I have a huge sympathy for the Minister, Secretary of State and their government. Everyone knows they inherited a mess from the previous regime's chaos and missed opportunities. Years of underinvestment, as well as chopping, changing and rudderless leadership, have left our public transport in turmoil. And I do appreciate and want to publicly acknowledge the new government's worthy intentions and evident desire to improve the situation. My party consequently welcomes the government's commitment to long overdue rail reform. I'm glad to see the first green shoots of positive change. Ensuring HS2 reaches Euston in the first phase of the project is clearly critical to achieving tangible benefits from what was in danger of becoming an expensive folly. Whilst recent talk of an integrated national transport strategy shows this government appreciates something needs to change. Likewise, recent announcements on buses, which, as you've heard today from so many colleagues, are critical to so many of our areas, are really welcome. So we welcome that. We know you get it. As my honourable friend so eloquently argued, or some of my honourable friends so eloquently argued, despite buses being the most utilised form of public transport in this country, they are regularly not given the attention nor funding they deserve. So thank you for that. So far, so good. However, there's always a however. Although the Transport Department is on side, I'm not so sure the Chancellor is, with her real terms cut to the department's day-to-day and capital budgets. If you're serious about growing the economy, she needs to be serious about properly funding the transport system on which the economy is built, rather than cutting budgets and making up the shortfall by hiking bus fares by up to 50% and above inflation increase in the cost of travel by train. I will indeed.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I just think it's worthwhile. I know that the honourable gentleman was not in this place at the time. Indeed, neither was I. But it is worthwhile looking at the verdict of another transport nerd, the journalist from the Transport Times back in 2015, which looks at exactly what has happened when the Liberal Democrats did have an opportunity to do something about rural buses. In county after county, cuts in rural bus service support have been severe. City deals may have been welcomed, but the idea that local government might be trusted to raise its own funding and decide on priorities has slipped further into the mists of history. I just think it's worth reminding the Chamber of that fact.
We're talking about now, and we're talking about the fact that you've reduced the bus fare cap. Sorry. Sit down.
Third time. Just a quick reminder for people, when I am on my feet, members should not be. Third time the honourable gentleman has said you. Perhaps he'll be a little bit more careful in the rest of his speech. Paul Kohler.
Apologies, Madam Deputy Speaker. We are talking about now, and we're talking about the hike in the bus fare cap to £3. It would only cost £150 million, Madam Deputy Speaker, to keep it at £2. That's what the House of Commons Library says. I'd like to thank the Minister, Madam Deputy Speaker, for writing to me this week to confirm a full monitoring and evaluation report has been completed by his department and will be published in due course. But why, Madam Deputy Speaker, is it not being published now? If it's there, we want to see it. What does it say? Now, I do not doubt the battles the Minister and his colleagues are having with their colleagues in the Treasury. I know the Transport Department gets it. It recognises there are fundamental problems across our public transport system. However, there's still vanishingly little detail on which to form a judgment as to whether or not they have hit upon the right solutions. Take the railways, for example. Yesterday came the long-awaited announcement for the first 3 train operating companies to be brought back into public ownership. The South Western Railways, which I used on my journey this morning, will come to public ownership next May. That much is known. However, what is not known is how that in itself will improve the customer experience and the service offered. As Great British Railways will still not formally exist by then, South Western Railways will, at least temporarily, be left in the hands of the government's formerly named operator of last resort, which surely needs more than a name change. Now it's assuming responsibility for millions of extra journeys without a clear mission or purpose, without the necessary resource or expertise, without an effective passenger watchdog, and without meaningful reform of our broken fare system. Whilst even when Great British Railways arrives at the station, we still have no real understanding of how, or even if, this new behemoth is going to proceed smoothly along the track. Uncertainty also shrouds many other public transport plans. Too many local authorities are waiting to know what funds and schemes will be maintained or what will be scrapped, stifling investment and leaving too many areas and communities adrift. As we can see, with the lack of certainty over the Northern Powerhouse, the electrification of North Wales Rail, levelling up and active travel. That's why we welcome talk of an integrated national transport plan, as it's clear the current piecemeal approach is letting down communities and local economies. But the devil will be in the detail, and we need to see it sooner rather than later. Apologies. Uncertainty likewise surrounds this government's approach to rebuilding our decaying infrastructure. To improve our public transport, we need to get spades into the ground, invest money and effort into electrification. Most importantly, build new infrastructure. Whilst there's widespread public disquiet regarding our current public transport provision, there's also deep scepticism about and often outright opposition to the major infrastructure projects necessary to achieve real improvement. HS2's repeated cost overspends and missed deadlines have contributed to an environment in which the public are rightly sceptical about the UK's ability to deliver infrastructure on time and within budget. We need to get real. And whilst Bruce Wayne might be rich enough to spend £100 million on a bat shed, the British taxpayer isn't. The UK does not have the time or the resource required to put every rail line in a tunnel. And politicians across the political spectrum need to promote a more mature dialogue to improve public understanding of the trade-offs necessary to improve public transport. For as we've seen with other large-scale infrastructure projects, once built, the public reception is overwhelmingly positive, as it was with Crossrail 1, where the benefits of the Elizabeth line are already being lauded from Reading to Romford, with protests long forgotten and a host of neighbouring MPs calling for its extension to their constituencies in a recent debate I attended in Westminster Hall. So let's be honest about what needs to be done, what the government has learned from these projects. And let's ensure the billions spent acquiring that knowledge, along with the supply chains and skilled workforce that we've built up, is not lost by maintaining a steady pipeline of new projects. In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, too much time has been wasted and we do not have time to waste. Public transport is vital to our economy, to widening opportunity and our transition to net zero. As a Londoner, I realise I am blessed by the public transport system we have in the capital. Despite sometimes justified criticism of TfL, it stands as an exemplar of what can be achieved via a coordinated transport strategy and a non-ideological approach to ownership, working with both public and private providers to create an integrated transport network. As we've heard from colleagues across the House, the situation is very different across much of the country. I hope the Secretary of State and the Chancellor are both listening. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Shadow Secretary of State Gareth Bacon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In opening, I would like to congratulate the Honourable Member, the Lady for Glastonbury and Somerton, for successfully applying for this debate and the Backbench Business Committee for granting it. Madam Deputy Speaker, public transport is an indispensable part of our national life. It plays a vital role in our commercial, social and economic existence. And we've had an interesting debate this afternoon. There have been some noteworthy contributions from the Honourable Members for Glastonbury and Somerton, Horsham, Guildford, Thornbury and Yate, Taunton and Wellington, and just now for the Honourable Member from Wimbledon from the Liberal Democrat side. On the government benches, the opening speech was made by the Honourable Lady, the Member for Dunstable and Leighton Buzzard, who made her maiden speech in this debate. It was a very thoughtful speech about bus use, and I'm sure she will serve her constituents diligently in her time in this place, and I wish her well. She was followed by some capable contributions from the members for Swindon North, Stroud, Leeds South West and Morley, Edinburgh South West, Rossendale and Darwen, Croydon East, and finally East Thanet. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm going to begin by commenting on the previous Conservative government's time in office. On rail, it may have escaped the attention of honourable members that between 2010 and 2024, the Conservative government spent over £100 billion in operating and enhancing our railways. This allowed the completion of major projects, including Crossrail, Thameslink, major upgrades to East Coast Main Line, Greater Anglia Main Line, Midland Main Line, and the Great Western Main Line. We committed £36 billion to the Network North programme, which, unless the Labour government stops it, will deliver long-term transformative transport projects that would benefit a great many people in the north of England. This programme is under review by the government with no guarantee that any of it will be taken forward. So obviously, we call on the government to honour the programme in full. Madam Deputy Speaker, we electrified over 1,200 miles of track compared to the mere 63 miles electrified in the 13 years of the previous Labour government. 75% of rail journeys are now taken on electrified tracks. We sought schemes that would reconnect communities to our railways, providing new stations for passengers to use. For example, the proposed new station at Edginswell in Torbay, which would complement the delivery of a new station at Marsh Barton near Exeter and would particularly serve the needs of Torbay Hospital. I know that Torbay Council are keen advocates for this, and I would hope that the Labour government would offer the same commitment to it that we had. Madam Deputy Speaker, to support our bus networks, we invested an unprecedented amount of over £3.5 billion for the bus sector since March 2020 to support its recovery from the pandemic. We provided £525 million of funding to deliver 4,000 new British-built electric or hydrogen buses, and we extended the Get Around for £2 scheme until the end of 2024, capping hundreds of single bus fares, helping passengers reliant on buses with the cost of travel, a scheme that we pledged to maintain for the entirety of this Parliament. I would also like to remind the House of some facts that were curiously missing from some of the speeches of honourable members today, particularly those members, Madam Deputy Speaker, sitting opposite me. If we turn our gaze to Wales, where Labour have been in power for a quarter of a century, we see that the number of journeys undertaken by local buses has declined by almost a quarter in the last decade, severely impacting those in the most rural areas. We also know that the Welsh Labour administration has spent £40 million on rolling out 20-mile-an-hour speed limits to try to force motorists onto public transport that the Labour administration themselves have made less reliable, less regular and less affordable. If we look at London, which has been blighted by the leadership of Sadiq Khan for the last 8.5 years, we see that London's mayor recently spent £6.3 million of public money on yet more virtue signalling, renaming London Overground Lines, something that I'm sure commuters thanked him for last week as the Elizabeth line was suspended and 5 underground lines faced severe delays. And from a man who promised to roll up his sleeves and ensure that there will be no more transport strikes, we have seen over 130 days of strikes during his term of office. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, we know that the Labour Party has promised what they have promised to the voters of this country. In their manifesto, they have pledged new infrastructure, an overhaul of Britain's railways, and to give certainty to car manufacturers. They've promised a utopian system of public transport. But we know that the methods by which the government has set out to achieve this has been depressingly predictable. One of the Labour government's first acts was to provide train drivers with inflation-busting pay rises without securing any productivity improvements for passengers at all. And this bribe to the unions has entirely predictably failed to prevent repeated threats of further strike action. Then, as part of their ongoing war against rural communities, they've cut £1.3 billion worth of road improvement schemes, and they've also increased the previous Conservative government's £2 bus fare cap to £3, increasing fares on hundreds of bus routes across the country. Totally predictably, I get heckled about it not being paid for. As honourable members will be aware when they've been in this place for a little bit longer, government schemes are funded for particular periods of time and then the funding is reviewed. The new £3 bus cap, costing bus users 50% more than the previous cap, is only guaranteed to last until the end of next year, whereas it was a Conservative Party manifesto commitment to retain the cap at the £2 level for the whole of this Parliament. Finally, and perhaps notably, the government have introduced and passed the Passenger Railway Services Public Ownerships Act. Instead of implementing the measured and sensible reforms set out by the Williams-Shapps Review, the government have passed an act that will not improve passenger experience, and nor will it make significant savings. Indeed, it may prove to cost the taxpayer significantly more. The government insists that savings to the taxpayer will amount to £150 million because of the removal of fees paid to train operating companies. Now, even if that is correct, it amounts to a saving of a mere 0.6% of what is currently spent on the railways. And even that tiny figure is in doubt. Analysis conducted by rail partners suggested that removing the incentive to control costs could lead to annual subsidies being at least £1 billion higher by the end of this Parliament. From whatever angle one looks at it, it is hard to see this as anything other than an ideological move, one that has more to do with attempting to appease the radical elements of the Labour Party hungry for old-fashioned hard-left policies than the good of the passenger and the taxpayer. Yes.
I'd just like to give the Right Honourable Gentleman the opportunity to confirm that the Tory government was perfectly comfortable with public ownership of train operating companies as long as they belonged to other governments and other places in Europe.
The previous government, Madam Deputy Speaker, was prepared to do what works rather than follow ideology in spite of the evidence to the contrary. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I've been the Shadow Transport Secretary for 31 days, and I'm already on my second Secretary of State. I've known the new Secretary of State, the Right Honourable Lady for Swindon South, for almost 2 decades, dating back to our time as councillors representing our respective London boroughs on London Council's Transport and Environment Committee. Now, she's not in her place today. Secretaries of State can't be everywhere. That's why they have junior ministers. And I'm sure that the Honourable Member for Wakefield and Rothwell will ably deputise for her this afternoon. My path crossed the new Secretary of State when I was Conservative leader on the London Assembly, and she was appointed the Deputy Mayor for Transport. Unfortunately, during her time at City Hall, London witnessed 28 strikes on TfL services, an increase in complaints about TfL by 77% over 3 years, an extension of the hated ultra-low emission zone, and perhaps most concerning of all, a £4 billion overspend and a 3-year delay to the opening of the Elizabeth line. Now, that said, Madam Deputy Speaker, in defence of the Right Honourable Lady, the buck for all of these failings doesn't stop with her. it stops with the Mayor of London. And the Right Honourable Lady is, in fact, somebody that I have a very high personal regard for. And so I look forward to welcoming her to her place. Madam Deputy Speaker, it is fair to say that we on this side of the House have doubts about the start made by this government. But having said all of this, I would like to emphasise that His Majesty's opposition will not oppose the government just for the sake of it. I don't believe that a single member of this House wants a public transport system that fails. As I said at the outset, public transport is an indispensable part of our national life, and a successful transport system is vital both to our present and to our future. If the government get things right, we will acknowledge that. But where they get them wrong, we will continue to hold them to account.
Minister Simon Lightwood.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd first of all like to thank the Honourable Member for Glastonbury and Somerton for securing this important debate on improving public transport. And Madam Deputy Speaker, I believe we have reached our destination in terms of the last of the maiden speeches on this side of the House. And of course, I believe that we've saved one of the best for last, and congratulate the member for Leighton, for Dunstable and Leighton Buzzard on her fantastic contribution, and look forward very much so to working with her in her capacity as a member of the Transport Select Committee. I'd also like to thank honourable members who have spoken during the debate for their insightful points. I am pleased to respond for the government and will do my best to address the issues that they have raised. I would like to start my response by emphasising that this government is putting the needs of passengers front and centre of transport reforms. We fully recognise the importance of public transport to our communities, in rural communities, towns and cities. Delivered well, it enables people to access opportunities through work and education and access to shops, leisure activities and essential services that they need. It can sustain and improve economic growth and productivity, unlock housing and commercial development opportunities and connect people to each other, to businesses and markets and to international gateways. But we also know that there's lots of work to be done to improve our public transport. Many people and places suffer from poor connectivity and challenging journeys, impacting both their quality of life and their access to opportunities. That is why this government is focusing on improving performance on the railways and driving forward rail reform, improving bus services and growing usage across the country, and transforming infrastructure to work for the whole country, promoting social mobility and tackling regional inequalities. And we have been making progress. Last week, the government set out its plan to develop an integrated national transport strategy, which will set out how all modes of transport should be designed, built and operated to better serve all the people who use it and enable them to live fulfilling lives. To kickstart this process, on the 28th of November, the Department launched a public call for ideas seeking to capture people's views and experiences of transport across England and what could be done to improve it. We know that delivering an effective, efficient and integrated public transport system that meets the needs of regional and national needs and the needs of people wherever they live and work will play a vital role in delivering the missions of this government.
Would my right honourable friend give way?
Certainly will.
Thank you very much. I'm grateful to the right honourable friend for giving way. I noticed that he was specifically talking about the regional and national economic growth strategies. I would urge the right honourable gentleman and his friends in the department to consider whether we need to have a particular strategy for public transport in our coastal communities, which suffer particularly from poor connectivity, reducing our ability to be able to grow our economies, particularly all year round.
Simon Lightwood.
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and as someone that grew up in a coastal community myself, I can say firsthand that I understand that coastal communities have unique challenges, and I will of course take that away to the department. So that important work to improve services, Madam Deputy Speaker, has already begun. We started reforming transport on day one after the general election. Take buses, the most commonly used mode of public transport in Britain. where this government has ambitious plans to improve services and grow passenger numbers, because we know how important bus services are to local communities up and down the country, and in particular in rural areas where we know for many buses can be a lifeline and the only way of getting around and accessing vital services.
Would the Minister give way?
So.
Bus cuts are absolutely devastating for the woman I spoke with who couldn't get her weekly shop, the young man I met who had to leave for work hours early to try and get multiple buses, and the husband who couldn't get a bus to the care home his wife was in. And since 2008, the East Midlands has, more than any other region, suffered bus cuts of 60%. Would the Minister agree with me that regional inequality is at the heart of this debate, and it is far past time that we saw investment in our buses?
Simon Lightwood.
I thank my friend for that intervention. Absolutely, of course. I think we need to ensure that we have effective, efficient and affordable public transport in every single corner of the country. In September, we took the first step to empower local leaders by introducing a statutory instrument to expand franchising powers beyond mayoral combined authorities to all local transport authorities. We also consulted on new guidance for local leaders looking to bring in services to public control. This new simplified guidance will help break down barriers to local control of bus services, speeding up the process and bringing down costs. And of course, the Buses Bill will empower local leaders by giving them the tools that they need to address local public transport challenges, including further changes to simplify bus franchising and allowing for the creation of locally owned bus companies. We've already seen examples of the improvements local leaders can make to services. Take, for example, my favourite example, the bus network in Manchester, the B network, which is on course to complete re-regulation of buses into its network in the new year, becoming the first city region outside of London to put them fully back under public control after 4 decades of deregulation. This new franchise bus network has seen increases in both patronage and punctuality. We're backing up those reforms with new funding for buses next year. In the budget, the government confirmed over £1 billion to help local transport authorities and operators deliver high-quality, reliable public services. It includes £150 million to deliver the new £3 fare cap, ensuring passengers can access affordable fares and better opportunities, £712 million for local authorities to continue to support and improve their bus services, and £243 million for the Bus Service Operators Grant directly to bus operators to support and protect existing services. This funding is the next stop on our journey to improving services. Every region in England will benefit. This money will make a real difference for people across the country and could be used to fund more frequent services so people can get to more places more often, safer, better, more accessible bus stops, new electric buses, or better real-time information so passengers can be confident their bus will actually turn up. Of course, it's not just bus passengers that want their services to run on time. On the railway, we have been clear that services have been failing passengers with performance inconsistent across the country and the service in many areas not where it needs to be. Improving performance is a key priority, and we'll continue to challenge the worst performing train operating companies and their network rail counterparts to address poor performance and raise standards. Just as with buses, we have been making progress. We have resolved long-running industrial disputes over pay, ending the massive disruption and financial impact of national strikes, and resetting industrial relations. This paves the way for more collaboration with the trade unions and delivering a railway that works for everyone. In addition to continuing to fund the operation of the railway, we're committed to investing to deliver improvements for passengers. We are simplifying and modernising the rail fares and ticketing system, and have already made great progress. We've driven forward pay-as-you-go in the South East through the delivery of Project Oval Phase 1A. In 2025, we will see further phases of Project Oval go live, including Stansted. We have also completed detailed design of pay-as-you-go schemes in the West Midlands, Greater Manchester, or planning to launch digital pay-as-you-go trials in 2025. And we continue to progress long-distance fares reforms with trials on LNER. Looking forward, we've committed to undertaking a fares review to be completed over 2025. We will also continue to invest in infrastructure. Just last week, the Railway Passenger Services Public Ownership Act, which received royal assent on the 28th of November, enables us to bring passenger service operations back into public ownership, starting with South Western Railway Services in May 2025, C2Cs in July and Great Angulars in the autumn.
I thank the Minister for giving way. You mentioned the infrastructure. Minister, did I say, what did I say?
Minister mentioned you. Minister mentioned
you said you, so say he.
Did I? Sorry. I thank the Minister for giving way. The Minister mentioned infrastructure. We've seen significant delays on the line from the West Country these last few weeks due to flooding. In particular, the trains are having to divert between Parkway and Swindon are having to go via Bath and Chippenham. And also, my local residents are concerned that the work to try to stop flooding happening on this length of line, which is very prone to flooding, may have led to their houses being flooded. So will he agree to meet with me to discuss the infrastructure issues on this particular section of railway?
I thank the honourable member for their intervention, and I will make sure that I pass on that request to the Railways Minister, who I'm sure will be pleased to meet with you. Within this Parliament, all passenger service operations will have transitioned into the management of Great British Railways, which we will establish as the directing mind for the railway by bringing forward further legislation in this session. Great British Railways will ensure the highest standards of customer service and operational performance. It will simplify the railways, bringing together the delivery of passenger services, infrastructure and responsibility for planning and the use of the network, bringing an end to years of fragmentation and waste. But we are not waiting for this further legislation. We've already brought key parts of the rail industry together as Shadow Great British Railways, working to improve services, unblock barriers to delivery and move the rail network towards greater financial sustainability. While we must and will improve the railways in the short term, we must also think about the long term. We are committed to setting out a long-term rail strategy that will provide a framework for the industry over the next 30 years. We will work with stakeholders to ensure this strategy maximises the benefits of rail for everyone. And when I say everyone, across all our public transport system, these improvements have to be to benefit everyone. This government wants everyone to have access to public transport and is committed to supporting improvements to services so they are more inclusive and enable everyone to travel safely, confidently and with dignity.
Would my right honourable friend give way? Thank you very much. I'm really grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way, especially since it's the second time. I'm particularly struck, however, by what the right honourable gentleman is saying with regard to making sure that everybody has access to what they need. The Minister will have heard what I mentioned in particular about access to healthcare via public transport. Would there be any consideration when we are talking about integrating our transport strategy into other strategies that might be achieving our overall government missions, that we may have a due regard to where existing health services are provided when making decisions about where we will put that infrastructure in?
Simon Lightwood.
I thank my honourable friend for their intervention, and I think you make a very powerful point. I would obviously encourage you to make a submission to the integrated transport.
The Minister's done it 3 times now. If I can tell off new members, I can certainly tell off long-standing ones. No yous in the chamber.
I'm quite flattered to be called a long-standing member, Madam Deputy Speaker. When I say everyone across our public transport system, these improvements have to be to benefit everyone. This government wants everyone to have access, as I said, to public transport. The first phase of the accessible information regulations came into force earlier this year and now require buses and coaches used on local services since October 2019 to provide audible and visual route and destination announcements, helping everyone to travel with confidence. We have committed to working with disabled people to develop and publish an accessibility roadmap that will set out the steps being taken to improve rail accessibility. And through the Access for All programme, we are continuing to work to provide step-free access routes at railway stations. But all of these efforts are impossible without local partners. This government recognises that decisions on how and where to intervene to improve local transport should be made locally. It is why, in the first few days of coming to power, we work to strengthen the relationship between central government and local leaders, working in partnership with them to develop and deliver their priorities. On funding, we're committed to simplifying the local transport funding landscape for local authorities, ending inefficient competitions and allowing places more flexibility to decide the transport projects that will most benefit their area. The city-region sustainable transport settlements provide the largest city regions with long-term funding settlements and empower mayors to deliver infrastructure projects that will have transformative effects on transport based on their local priorities, improving the lives of people in their great city regions. Looking ahead, we're also committed to giving all local government multi-year funding settlements at the forthcoming spending review to help them make long-term plans for transport in their areas, backed up by deepening regional devolution. In conclusion, high-quality transport infrastructure supports growth and opportunity, and bringing decisions about transport closer to people is key to improving transport networks we rely on every day. We will therefore empower local leaders to take greater oversight of their local transport networks. We're also committed to simplifying the local transport funding landscape for local authorities, ending those inefficient competitions I referred to. We're using data and research to continue to build our understanding of what people need from the transport network, and we're continuing to invest in our transport network, taking a long-term view to get the right mix of existing projects and new schemes to deliver public transport fit for the 21st century. Reliable, affordable, safe and accessible transport, which works for passengers and efficiently moves goods around the country, is key to economic growth and people accessing opportunities. People travel for a purpose, whether it's to go to work or education, access services like hospitals and shops, or to meet family and friends. We are working hard to ensure that our public transport networks and services are more accessible, available and affordable to those who rely upon it the most, wherever they live and work. And we're continuing to build stronger relationships with our devolved partners to ensure public transport is serving the needs of local communities. Just to go on to some specific points raised by members. First of all, the member for Glastonbury and Somerton, who obviously raised a number of specific transport issues within the constituency. I will, of course, be happy to address the very specific issues outside of the chamber, but looking at the more core themes, if you'll forgive me, turning first of all to the Integrated National Transport Strategy. The government's manifesto committed, Madam Deputy Speaker, to developing a long-term strategy for transport, and also said that transport services have remained fragmented and inefficient, with companies and sectors failing to speak to and plan with each other. This government wants to focus on how transport can be designed, built and operated to better service all people who use it and enable them to live fulfilling lives. We also touched upon rural bus services quite a lot during the debate, Madam Deputy Speaker, so I'd like to talk a little bit about that. I think by giving local transport authorities more power to deliver the model that works best for their areas and flexibility over funding, they can deliver comprehensive bus networks, including the use of demand-responsive transport where appropriate and desired, to make bus services work for all communities, including in rural areas. The Buses Bill will put decision-making in the hands of local leaders across England, including those in rural areas, to determine how best to design their local bus services so that they have control over routes and schedules. And I would say that bus franchising is for all areas. It can be for all areas of the country. It's not just reserved for places like Manchester, who've done it so effectively. We were looking at various different models of franchising, which we hope to expand upon in the process of the buses bill. Members also raised the need for real-time information. I totally agree. I think that's really important, empowering people to make effective decisions and raising confidence in people, particularly women and girls, to be able to go out and use public transport, knowing that the bus is going to turn up on time, or whether they wait that little bit longer before they go out for the bus. These little things can make a lot of difference when it comes to confidence in passengers. Turning now to the wider issue of bus funding. So, as I said, as part of the budget, we confirmed over £1 billion, Madam Deputy Speaker, for 2025-2026 financial year to support bus services in England outside of London and to keep our fares affordable. Onto the bus fare cap. The current £2 cap on single bus fares have been due to run out at the end of this year as its funding expired. This will, of course, be replaced by a £3 cap to help millions of people to reach better opportunities and promote greater bus use by passengers. Just say thank you to the member for Horsham for their contribution as well, the member for Swindon North, the member for Guildford. On accessibility, the Rail Minister has committed to work with the disabled community to develop and publish an accessibility roadmap in advance of GBR being set up. Thank you to the member for Stroud. As I mentioned a moment ago, franchising can meet the needs of all shapes and sizes of communities throughout the country, and I hope we can demonstrate that during the passage of the buses bill. Thank you to the member for Thornbury and Yate, the member for Leeds, South West and Morley, who share many of the same transport challenges. But let me also put on record my thanks and admiration to the Queen of Buses, the West Yorkshire Mayor, for everything that she's doing to promote buses in West Yorkshire, taking them back into public control. And thank you to the member for Taunton and Wellington. I'm sure the Rail Minister will have heard his words regarding his station projects.
I'm very grateful to the Minister for giving way, particularly as he's comprehensively trying to address all the comments in the debate. I realise he can't say things about individual projects, but as a result of this debate, would he undertake to say to the Secretary of State the need to release the most important Restoring Your Railway projects for funding?
I'm sure the Secretary of State will have heard that message, as will the Rail Minister, regarding his individual project. Thank you to the member for Edinburgh South West, the member for Rossendale and Darwen, the member for Croydon East. Of course, I'm sure the member for Croydon East will welcome the £485 million, which was delivered to Transport for London in the last budget. As a Northern MP, I can say that without any hesitation. Thank you to the member for East Thanet. A passionate speech delivered by a passionate advocate for public transport. Turning now to the opposition spokesman. I'll take no lectures from the opposition on public transport. And all I will say is this: a picture paints 1,000 words. And with that, thank you.
I now call the member in charge to wind up for a few minutes. Sarah Dyke.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd firstly like to congratulate the member for Dunstable and Leighton Buzzard on her maiden speech. I wish I could share her frustration when 3 buses turn up at once. We in Somerset would be delighted should one turn up at any time. I'd like to thank all the honourable members from across the House for their attendance and their contributions today. The wide interest shared highlight the importance of this debate. And as I said in my opening remarks, the poor quality of rural transport, particularly bus services, has been evidenced by all of the honourable members from rural areas who have spoken today. Environmental and economic importance of public transport can't be overstated. It's crucial to helping the government hit 2 of their key 5 missions. So they should grasp the opportunity to fix public transport in rural areas, and I welcome the Minister's comments today. But residents who travel from the southwest must know that the impact of the construction of the Old Oak Common is going to impact them, and obviously we need to give them our assurances that the work is going to be mitigated as far as possible. And I would also welcome a conversation with the Rail Minister on behalf of my constituents as well. We also desperately need more information regarding the renationalisation of the South Western Railway. Many of my constituents are reliant on this operator, and they must have the confidence that this service will improve. Madam Deputy Speaker, my constituents in Somerton and Langport desperately want to see the train station to connect them to the railway, and they need the information as soon as possible. The lack of correspondence across successive governments is very disappointing. So if a train station is still some time away, and I hope that it isn't, then the need to improve bus services and integrate them with the railway is absolutely vital. My honourable members from across the chamber recognise this point, and I hope that we can make progress on this, and I thank the Minister for recognising this also. I look forward to seeing some of the models for franchising, as the Minister set out. Funding to improve rural bus services, and a real focus is needed to provide rural residents with a working public transport system, and I eagerly await to see how the government approaches this further over the coming weeks and months. And I would like to ask the Minister to set out guidance for social and economic outcomes, and I believe the government's Bus Better bill provides the perfect opportunity to be able to do this. So I thank the Minister for his... Yes, I will.
Thank you. And thank you for giving me. I know this is time's tight, almost tight, and I know this is a very important point for her. She's really summing up the debate quite well. She will know, though, that the Transport Select Committee has just launched an inquiry on rural bus services, and one of the things they're focusing on is that social and economic aspect. So will she encourage people on our network to respond to that call for evidence?
I thank the honourable member for that intervention. I absolutely will, and surely encourage all members to do exactly that. So just to summarise, I thank the Minister for his assurances. He knows that the Liberal Democrats will hold him to account.
Yeah. The question is, as on the order paper, as many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.